Welcome to our journey into the animal kingdom, specifically focusing on a group of creatures you have likely seen in your garden after a rainstorm. Today, we are exploring the general characters of Annelida. These segmented marvels might seem simple at first glance, but as we will discover, they are actually masterpieces of biological engineering. By the end of this video, you will understand not just what an annelid is, but the elegant physics and mathematics that allow them to survive and thrive in their environments. To begin our exploration, imagine a long freight train made of dozens of identical boxcars connected end to end. If one boxcar gets slightly damaged, the rest of the train can still function independently because of this modular design. This is exactly how the body of an annelid, like your common garden earthworm, is built by nature. Annelids are the segmented worms of the animal kingdom, and their bodies are divided into a series of repeating rings or segments. This brilliant evolutionary design allows them to move with incredible flexibility and survive injuries that would be fatal to other creatures. Now that we understand their basic modular design, let us look at their formal biological definition. Scientifically, Annelida is a major phylum of invertebrate animals, characterized by a few intimidating terms that are actually quite simple. First, they are triploblastic, meaning their bodies develop from 3 primary embryonic cell layers, allowing them to form complex, specialized organs. Second, they are bilaterally symmetrical. If you draw an imaginary line down their middle, from head to tail, the left and right sides are perfect mirror images. Finally, they are coelomates, meaning they possess a true fluid-filled body cavity completely lined by tissue, which houses and protects their internal organs. Building on those foundational biological terms, we arrive at the most crucial characteristic of this phylum. Their most defining trait is called metamerism. Metamerism is the true repetition of body segments, but it is not just skin deep. This repetition occurs both on the outside and the inside of the animal. Each segment often contains its own set of muscles, nerves, and excretory organs. This internal and external repetition is what truly separates annelids from other types of unsegmented worms, providing that incredible modular redundancy we discussed earlier. Understanding their anatomy naturally leads us to ask why these segmented worms matter to us. They are actually crucial for the survival of our ecosystems and even human medicine. Earthworms, the most famous annelids, are nature's ultimate plows. They constantly tunnel through the earth, aerating the soil and breaking down dead organic matter into nutrient-rich fertilizer. Without them, our agricultural soils would become hard, sterile, and unable to support the crops that feed the entire world. In the medical field, leeches, another type of annelid, produce powerful blood-thinning chemicals like hirudine. Surgeons still use these remarkable creatures today to prevent blood clots and promote healing during delicate reattachment surgeries. Knowing how important they are, let us examine how they actually survive, starting with how they breathe. Unlike humans, most annelids do not have lungs. Instead, they breathe directly through their moist skin, a process known as cutaneous respiration. For this to work, the worm must absorb enough oxygen through its skin to supply its entire internal body volume. This creates a strict mathematical limitation on how thick a worm can grow. The efficiency of their breathing depends entirely on their surface area to volume ratio. If a worm gets too thick, its internal volume grows much faster than its skin surface area, and it will suffocate. This biological limitation brings us to a simple geometric formula that dictates the shape of these animals. We can represent this limitation using a simplified formula for a cylinder. The formula is R is approximately equal to 2 divided by R. In this equation, the symbol R represents the surface area to volume ratio. The symbol R represents the radius of the worm's cylindrical body. The number 2 is a constant derived from the geometry of a long cylinder where the ends are negligible. Conceptually, this formula tells us a profound biological truth. As the radius increases, the ratio decreases rapidly. Therefore, to maintain a high enough ratio to breathe efficiently, an annelid must keep its radius very small, which is why worms are always long and thin rather than short and fat. Now that we have our formula, let us look at a practical example comparing the respiratory efficiency of two different worms. We want to calculate the surface area to volume ratio to see which one breathes more efficiently. First, we have worm A, which is a small, thin worm with a radius of 1 millimeter. We substitute the radius of worm A into our simplified equation. We replace the variable R with the value of 1. This simple division gives us a final ratio of 2 inverse millimeters. This relatively high number indicates that worm A has plenty of skin surface area compared to its internal volume, allowing it to absorb oxygen very effectively. Having seen the ratio for a thin worm, let us perform the exact same calculation for a thicker worm, worm B. We substitute its radius of 5 millimeters into the denominator of our equation. Dividing 2 by 5 yields a much smaller ratio of 0.4 inverse millimeters. Comparing the two results, worm A has a ratio of 2, while worm B has a ratio of only 0.4. This physically means worm A can absorb oxygen much more efficiently than worm B. This drastic drop shows how quickly volume outpaces surface area as an animal grows thicker. If an earthworm grew as thick as a snake, it would simply suffocate because its surface area could not supply enough oxygen to its massive volume. Beyond their breathing, the physical shape of annelids leads us to explore another fascinating physical property, their hydrostatic skeleton. Imagine an earthworm trying to push its way through densely packed garden soil. They do not have bones to push with. Instead, their circular muscles contract and apply a force to the fluid trapped inside their column. This generates internal fluid pressure that allows the worm to wedge the soil apart. To understand exactly how much pressure they can generate, we must rely on a fundamental principle of physics that applies perfectly to biology, looking at the relationship between force, area, and pressure. This brings us to the standard pressure formula, which divides the applied force by the area over which it is distributed. The formula is P equals F divided by A. In this formula, the symbol P represents the pressure measured in pascals. The symbol F stands for the muscular force measured in newtons. The symbol A represents the cross-sectional area of the worm segment, measured in square meters. Conceptually, this mathematical relationship tells us that if the worm applies the same force over a smaller area, the resulting pressure will increase significantly. This is the mechanical advantage of having a fluid-filled coilum divided into tiny segments. Now that we have our pressure formula, let us calculate the actual pressure an earthworm generates. We are given that the worm's circular muscles contract and apply a force of 0.02 newtons. This force is applied over a tiny cross-sectional area of 0.0004 square meters. We need to find out exactly how much internal fluid pressure the worm generates. By plugging in the worm's muscular force and its cross-sectional area into our formula, We divide 0.02 by 0.0004. We arrive at a final pressure of 50 pascals. This means the worm's internal fluid is pushing outward and forward with a pressure of 50 pascals, stiffening the front segments into a rigid biological drill. To truly grasp how this pressure translates to movement, let us look at this diagram of the annelid hydrostatic skeleton. On the screen, you see a cross-section of the worm's body, clearly divided into metameric segments by vertical walls called septa. Inside each segment is the blue fluid-filled coulum. Notice the red arrows labeled P, pointing outward and forward. These represent the 50 pascals of internal pressure we just calculated. When the brown circular muscles on the outside contract, they squeeze the blue fluid. Because the fluid cannot be compressed, it pushes outward against the segment walls, elongating the worm and driving it in the direction of movement shown at the bottom. It is a brilliant demonstration of how annelids use basic fluid dynamics to conquer their subterranean environment without needing a single bone. We have covered a lot of ground today, so let us summarize the key takeaways. First, we learned that annelids are a triumph of evolutionary design, utilizing metamerism and a true coelom to thrive. Their segmented bodies provide incredible flexibility and redundancy, ensuring survival even if parts of their body are damaged. Second, we saw how their physical dimensions are perfectly tuned by mathematics, specifically the surface area to volume ratio, to allow for efficient skin-based breathing. Finally, we explored how they use internal fluid pressure to create a hydrostatic skeleton, turning their soft bodies into rigid drills. Understanding these general characters gives us profound insight into how simple biological rules and physical forces combine to create highly successful organisms. Great job following along.